I stood in the corner of the living room, leaning against the wallpaper I'd once chosen myself, silk, with peacock feathers. The glass in my hand was sticky with warm apple cider. It was sweet and cloying, like this party, my parents' wedding anniversary, 70 people in a house designed for 20. The air was thick and heavy, a mixture of roast duck fat, spicy ginger, my aunt's expensive Chanel perfume, and that special scent, quiet, icy judgment. "Emily, darling, come here." My mother's voice cut through the din like a blade. She stood at the piano, that polished black monster, with Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert, and a semicircle of cousins whose faces I could barely discern through the haze of memory. The smile on her face was blinding and sharp, surgically precise. "Tell everyone about your new job, honey, everyone's so excited." I'd been sick of this moment from the moment I stepped through the door. I took a small sip of cider, feeling the sweet liquid burn my throat. "I work at Metropolitan Hospital," my voice rang out, flat and lifeless, like a flat EEG. "She's being modest." Mom laughed. The sound was familiar, light, silvery, and it sent shivers down my spine. That laugh was always the prelude to a blow. "She just answers phones in the emergency room, barely making more than minimum wage, but we're just happy she's finally got a job somewhere after all that school." The last word hung in the air, heavy and venomous, as if I hadn't pored over books but spent 10 years making sandcastles. Aunt Sarah nodded, and her long manicured fingers settled on my hand, patting me condescendingly, as if I were patting the head of a clueless puppy. "At least it's honest work, dear, not everyone can be a star like your brother." And as if on cue, he appeared, David, my older brother. He smelled of expensive whiskey and smugness. He'd just closed some huge deal and mentioned it to, it seemed, every guest personally. "Hey, Em." His hand slapped my shoulder with a force that nearly spilled my measly cider. "Still signing up old ladies for x-rays?" "Well, someone's gotta do the dirty work, huh?" "I'm not actually at the reception desk," I started to say, but my mother's voice, clear and distinct, drowned out my muttering. "We tell everyone she works in healthcare," she whispered confidentially to Aunt Sarah, but her whisper was meant for the entire semicircle. "It sounds more respectable, although, to be honest, after all the money we poured into her education, we expected more." I'd been listening to this record for the last 6 years, ever since the day I stopped trying to explain anything. Let them think what they want. It was less painful than seeing their faces turn stony from the real truth. "And remember how she said she wanted to be a neurosurgeon when she was 10? Uncle Robert interjected, stirring ice in his whiskey. "It was so sweet." "Children have such touching fantasies," Aunt Sarah sighed, her gaze sliding over my simple dress. "It's a shame when they're shattered by reality." My cousin Jennifer, who had just become an assistant manager at a boutique on Madison Avenue, cast me a look of sweet, suffocating pity. "It must be tough, Emily, watching everyone else move up while well, but hey, the main thing is there's work, right?" I raised my glass and took a sip. The warm cider was disgusting. Such was the unshakable order of things in the Chin family, parents who had escaped Taiwan from nothing, building an import empire through their own sweat and hardships. Their children were destined to become the crown jewels of their creation. Doctors, lawyers, business titans. David played the role of golden boy brilliantly, building his own fortress of real estate. I was a defect, a chip, a blemish on the otherwise flawless facade. "By the way, how much do receptionists get paid?" asked cousin Marcus, an engineer from Silicon Valley. His eyes betrayed pure, unadulterated curiosity, as if he were looking at a rare, not particularly bright specimen. "Well, you'll make about 30,000 a year, David snorted, "if you're really lucky. No bonuses, no growth, a dead end, an assembly line." "We offered her a position in our office," a new voice rang out. My father joined the circle, his face a familiar stony mask of disapproval. A decent salary, a clean job, but no, she was drawn to that hospital of hers. "I like medicine," I breathed out, my voice thinner than cobwebs. "Answering the phone isn't medicine, dear," my mother corrected, her voice sweet as syrup. "That's office work, a completely different story." At that moment, the pager in the depths of my purse vibrated, sharp, insistent. I ignored it. Most likely, one of the residents was panicking again over a routine CT scan. Let them sort it out themselves. The most offensive thing, my mother continued, picking up speed like a well-oiled machine, is that we spared nothing for her. 7 years of university. 7. And what did it all amount to? Sitting at a counter with a phone receiver. 8. I blurted out automatically, my throat tightened, and I was on a scholarship. Mom simply waved me off, as if swatting away a pesky fly. What difference does it make, after all? Expensive, useless, and now everyone keeps asking what you really do. Jennifer's words hung in the air, sharp and sticky like cobwebs. Maybe she just didn't have the mental capacity for real medicine? Her voice was feigned gentleness, but a glint of malice danced in her eyes. Not everyone has the gift, at least she found something she could do. At that moment, the pager in my hand twitched again, purring like an angry hornet, insistently, demandingly. "We love you, David interjected, placing a heavy, commanding hand on my shoulder. His tone was oily, nauseating, but you have to admit, at your age, sitting behind some desk is a little sad. Normal people have a career path by 30, not a job title." She was always more diligent than gifted, Aunt Sarah sighed, looking at me as if I were a faded tapestry, not a star like David, but reliable, and that's valuable, too. The pager continued to ring, the vibration reverberated through my bones, insistent, like a knock on a door in the night. I turned away, covering the screen with my hand, and looked. Words flashed across the black screen, words that made my heart sink and the world shrink to a pinpoint. Code black, presidential level trauma, chief neurosurgeon required, ruptured aneurysm, no qualified specialists available. Ice coursed through my veins. Code black. This meant that there was a person in the hospital, or about to be, whose life depended on more than I could have ever imagined. Presidential level wasn't a metaphor, and ruptured aneurysm meant that minutes counted. My minutes. I had less than 20 to zip across the city before irreversible damage occurred to someone's brain, death, cell by cell. "Emily. Can you even hear us?" My mother's voice cut into my consciousness like a knife. It trembled with suppressed rage. "We're trying to talk about your future. You could show some basic respect." "I need to make a call," I breathed, and my fingers found the phone in my purse. My movements were precise, swift. "See?" David gestured theatrically at our assembled family. No concentration, no sense of purpose, just drifting wherever the wind blows, dropping everything to pick up the phone. I took a step back, turned to the window, into the black, mirror-like expanse of the night, and dialed the direct line to the operating room. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Chief," I said into the microphone, my voice transforming, becoming low, commanding, steely, "report your status, immediately." "Chief." Resident Patel's voice cut through the static, cracking with adrenaline. "They're bringing us the head of the presidential administration, a ruptured aneurysm in the basilar artery. It happened during an official reception. The Secret Service is already with him. They'll bring him in 7 or 8 minutes. Dr. Morrison is trying to set up the operating room, but he doesn't have clearance for this level of security. They won't let him in." "I'll be there in 20, I snapped, and protocols, incisions, and instruments were already clicking in my head like navigator switches. "Prepare, or 1, full neurophysiology team, CT scanner should be warmed up and waiting for the patient. Anesthesiologist should be intubated immediately upon arrival, and find Dr. Martinez, she's cleared to assist with this level of surgery." "Yes sir, Dr. Chin, the agents are asking specifically for you. Tell them I'm on my way, and, Patel," I paused, letting every word sink in, "if anyone touches that patient before I arrive, I will personally rip up their medical license, understood?" I tossed the phone in my bag and turned around. They were still standing there, in a semicircle, curiosity mingled with irritation and slight disdain. "What was that?" Mom hissed, her eyebrows raising to her hairline. "I need to get to the hospital, now," I said, already plotting the route in my mind. 15 minutes at blinding speed, ignoring all traffic lights. 17, if I wasn't lucky, either way, an eternity. "Well, you see?" Mom turned to Aunt Sarah with bitter triumph. "They're calling her in to cover for the holiday, because she's small fry. They don't even respect her privacy." "This is simply outrageous," Jennifer snorted, puckering her lips. "You need to learn to say no, Emily, you're just being used." One of the night receptionists must have called in sick, David concluded philosophically, sipping his whiskey. That's the fate of shift workers, always on standby. And then my personal phone rang. On the screen was a name that would make anyone in the hospital sit up straight, the CEO of Metropolitan, Mr. Harrison. I lifted the phone to my ear. Dr. Chin. Emily, thank God. His voice was tight, like a vice. I know you're not on duty, but we have an emergency. I've already been briefed, I interrupted, ruthlessly and clearly, a ruptured basilar artery aneurysm in a patient in the presidential circle. I'm on my way, my team is preparing the operating room according to my protocol. I need to activate Scarlet Sunset security protocols and a full lockdown of the unit. Is the Secret Service on site? They're here, they're requesting confirmation of your clearance. Have them check the medical command database. I have a valid Omega-level clearance for top-level medical interventions. And, Harrison, I lowered my voice to an icy whisper, a complete information embargo, not a single line to the press, not a single whisper in the hallway, until I give my approval. Already in progress, to outsiders, this is a planned hospitalization of a high-ranking official with a hypertensive crisis. Acknowledged. I'll be there in 14 minutes. I put the phone in my coat pocket and looked up. They stood there like statues, everyone, my mother, my father, David with his stupid half-smile, Aunt Sarah with her mouth slightly open. Even the din of the party around them seemed to fade, swallowed by this sudden, icy silence. They looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if I were an alien who had just materialized in their perfect living room. Emily, my mother's voice was slow, drawn out with incomprehension. She pronounced my name carefully, as if afraid it would explode. Who were you talking to just now? I need to go, I replied, pulling my coat over my shoulders in one sharp movement. The fabric rustled like a banner. There's an emergency at the hospital, a fatal one. What emergency? My father's voice rang with steel. He stepped forward, his brows drawing together in a menacing line. What can an administrator do that a doctor can't? The phone rang again. This time the number was unsigned, but the series of numbers was as familiar as my own handwriting, a direct line from a specific office on Capitol Hill. I lifted the receiver to my ear. Dr. Chin. Dr. Chin, this is Special Agent Morrison, Secret Service. The voice was low, devoid of any emotion other than absolute businesslike efficiency. We have confirmed the code black with a cabinet-level official. We require your personal confirmation. Are you accepting the case and will perform the procedure? Confirmed. I am traveling from a private address. Travel time to the Metropolitan is 13 minutes. The patient is not to be disturbed until I arrive. Operating room 1 is to be screened for devices by your people and prepared under my personal supervision. Acknowledged. Doctor, an escort will meet you at the service entrance. Your credentials and clearance have been verified. Thank you, Agent Morrison. I hung up. The silence in the circle became deafening, absolute. Even David stopped grinning, his mouth hung slightly open. Emily, Aunt Sarah whispered, her fingers tightening around the pearl necklace around her neck. Why did that man call you doctor? I have to go, I repeated, already buttoning my shirt. My fingers weren't shaking, they never did before surgery. This is a matter of life and death. Wait. Mom came closer. All trace of that sweet, venomous condescension was gone from her voice. There was something different now, bewilderment bordering on alarm. What are you really doing in this hospital? I froze at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. 6 long years, 6 years of gritting my teeth and letting them think I was a failure, 6 years of listening to them misrepresent my position, my accomplishments, the very essence of who I am. It seemed easier to bear this quiet shame than to endure their outright disbelief, their devaluation. But now, a man lay in the operating room, his brain bleeding, and every second of this pantomime was a monstrous waste. What you always thought, I said, my voice flat and lifeless. I work at the hospital. But he called you doctor, Jennifer stammered, her painted lips rounded with shock. Chief doctor? Chief of what? The pager in my pocket blared again. I snatched it up. The message was short and deadly. Patient in operating room, 120/80, CT scan detects massive subarachnoid hemorrhage, condition critical. I really have to go, I snapped and stepped out into the cold night, slamming the oak door. A fragment of David's sentence drifted through the thick glass, muffled and lost. What nonsense. Why on earth, the Secret Service, the receptionist? I couldn't hear any more. I flew to my car, the keys already jingling in my hand. The drive to the Metropolitan took 11 frantic minutes. I raced through red lights, blaring the siren I'd turned on for the first time in a year, and they didn't stop me. Somewhere up there, the order had already been given, and my route was clear. Behind the wheel, my phone buzzed 3 more times. Dr. Martinez, I'm in the operating room. Chief, everything is ready, we're waiting for you. Director Harrison, Emily, his blood pressure is dropping, they're putting him into an induced coma, time is running out. And the voice of my personal assistant, Sophia, Dr. Chin, should I activate the silence protocol for your personal communications? I parked at the back service entrance, where a man in a dark suit, earpiece wires dangling from his lapel, was already waiting. He checked my face against his tablet, nodded, and led me through a labyrinth of hidden corridors, past elevators that led directly to the sanctum sanctorum, the surgical wing. The patient is in critical condition, Dr. Chin, Agent Morrison reported curtly, walking beside me so quickly I could barely keep up. Our understanding is that you are the only neurosurgeon within a 500-mile radius with both Omega clearance and practical experience performing these procedures. That's the correct understanding, I said, and with those words, the last remnants of the family evening fell away and vanished. All that was left was the protocol, a scalpel, and a clock ticking in time with my heart, the twilight of consciousness, beyond which there was either light or nothingness. We burst into the pre-op area. Dr. Martinez was already wearing a sterile gown, her eyes wide and serious above her mask. Chief, she breathed out, and that single word held a world of relief. The patient is on the table. The CT scan shows a ruptured aneurysm in the middle cerebral artery with extensive hemorrhaging into the ventricles. We're losing him. Elapsed time, 37 minutes. Damn. This was the very edge, the very abyss. Every lost second now echoed with millions of dead neurons. Prepare for craniotomy, immediately, I commanded, already placing my hands under the stream of antiseptic. The stinging cold penetrated to the bone. Administer propofol to maintain muscle relaxation, and connect all neuromonitoring sensors. If even one trace falters, I need to know about it that very millisecond. Yes, Chief, we're already doing it. The nurse threw a sterile gown over me, and I, slipping my arms through the sleeves, continued to rattle off instructions. This was my world, pure, crystal clear, devoid of any ambiguity. There was no room here for familial innuendo or quiet judgment, only the mathematical precision of anatomy, the ruthless logic of physiology, and a goal as clear as diamond: save, now, at any cost. Chief, the latest CT scans are on the screen. Patel's voice was focused. I glanced at the monitor, finishing wiping my hands with the caustic solution. The picture was brutal. The aneurysm exploded like a bad grenade, splattering the basal cisterns with a dark, death-dealing crimson. This blood, this alien fluid, was compressing the brainstem, the oldest, most vital part, home to breathing and the heartbeat. I had an hour, maybe less, to open the skull, find the source of this hell, and seal it. Otherwise, death, or life, worse than death. Boring Room 1 is ready for admission, Dr. Chin, the coordinator's voice rang out over the speaker. Let's go. I shouldered the door and entered the gleaming white cavern. My team was already in place, transformed into faceless figures in gowns and masks. Martinez, my first assistant, her eyes above the mask, my second eyes. Patel at the neurophysiology monitors, a guard monitoring the brain's sleep, nurses, an anesthesiologist, a perfusionist, in case the heart gave out, and along the walls, blending into the shadows, stood people in dark clothes, their faces blank and expressionless, guardians from another world. The patient lay under a bright light, his head clamped in the steel crown of a clamp. The monitors showed green lifelines, still smooth, but I knew what a storm raged beneath the thin bone of his skull. Everyone, my voice rang out in the quiet of the operating room. We have a 63-year-old male patient. He has a catastrophic rupture of the anterior communicating artery aneurysm. He has a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage and is experiencing vasospasm. We're performing arterional trephination. Hematoma evacuation and aneurysm neck clipping. Estimated time, 4 to 5 hours. Any questions? Silence. Perfect, focused silence. Good, let's begin. I extended my hand, and the cold handle of the scalpel settled into my palm, like an extension of my will. Then there was a dance on the blade, every millimeter a challenge. The brain is unforgiving, it won't forget a rough touch, won't forgive an extra drop of blood. I immersed myself in this microcosm, pushing aside tissue, drilling into bone, carving a path through the web of vessels. Martinez was my perfect mirror, her tweezers appeared where they were needed, her aspirator poured out a sea of scarlet, clearing the field before I even glanced. 3 hours, 3 eternities, and there it was, the enemy, an ugly, spreading sack on the vessel wall, torn and leaking. I exposed it, carefully, like a sapper removing a mine, separating it from the delicate threads of nerve tissue. Clip. The instrument fell into my fingers, cold titanium. The next few seconds were crucial. I had to place this tiny clip precisely on the neck of the aneurysm, clamping it, without touching the main artery. One wrong move, and disaster. I closed the jaws, checked the position, microscopically adjusted. I checked again. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, but my hand was still. The clip is in place, blood flow to the aneurysm has stopped. Dr. Patel, how's your brain? All vitals are normal, Chief, no abnormalities, the brain is asleep. A subdued, collective exhalation, inaudible under the masks, but I felt it, the worst was over. Excellent, now, clean up the aftermath of this madness and close the door. Another hour and a half of meticulous work, and finally, I stepped back from the table, my whole body ached with tension. Suture him, take him to the neurological intensive care unit for continuous monitoring, report to me, every 2 hours, no exceptions. Yes, sir. Chief, Martinez nodded, and in her eyes I saw that rare something more precious than words, unconditional professional respect. Brilliant. I threw off my gloves, my bloody gown, and fatigue washed over me like a heavy, wet wave. 5.5 hours on the operating table, a deep, gut-wrenching tension from the realization that at stake wasn't just my life, but the stability they whispered about on the news, and before that, that theater of the absurd in my parents' living room, where they methodically took me apart for 3 hours. I stepped out into the hallway, my legs barely holding me up, and then I saw them, Director Harrison, his face pale from the stress, and next to him, a man in an impeccable suit, with the posture and gaze of a man accustomed to the world bowing before him, Deputy Chief of Staff, Richardson. Dr. Chin, Harrison stepped forward, this is Mr. Richardson. Mr. Richardson, I shook the outstretched hand, my own was cold. The operation is complete, your colleague has survived the most critical stage. The next 48 hours will be crucial, but we have reason for cautious optimism. Dr. Chin, Richardson's voice was low and weighty, the president asked me to convey his personal thanks to you. We are aware you were pulled away from a family celebration, your skill and dedication have been recognized at the highest level. I was simply doing my duty, sir. The nation is truly fortunate to have surgeons of your caliber, he continued, his gaze appraising, but now tinged with respect. Your profile is impressive, the youngest chief neurosurgeon in the hospital's history, over 300 successful brain surgeries, publications in leading journals. When the nature of the injury became known, the president personally requested your presence. I nodded, feeling my eyelids fill with lead. All I wanted now was to see the numbers on the monitors in the intensive care unit, not listen to government pleasantries. Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see my patient. It was 2:45 when I finally emerged into the deserted parking lot. A sharp drizzle blew off the river. My patient was stable, his brain quietly and orderly pinging on the monitors. If all goes well, he'll return to his important life, and the scar under his hair will be the only reminder of how thin the line is. I drove to my apartment on autopilot. The fatigue wasn't physical anymore, my bones and muscles simply stopped responding. It was utter devastation, a deep, dark silence in the soul after several hours balancing on the edge between life and nothingness. The phone in my bag vibrated like an irritated wasp, the vibration reverberated through my bones. I ignored it until I found myself in the hallway, in complete darkness, my back against the cold door. I was about to silence it once and for all, but the glow of the screen in the pitch darkness caught my eye. Dozens of notifications, 43 missed, 67 messages. Curiosity, a dull, mechanical force, made me touch the screen. Mom, call, urgent. Dad, What's the misunderstanding? Every channel is talking about Dr. Emily Chin, a neurosurgeon. This is a mistake. David, did you see that? Your name is on every newscast. What's going on? Jennifer, OMG, Emily, is that really you? They're calling you a national treasure. Aunt Sarah, honey, there seems to be a terrible mix-up in the news. They're showing your photo, but talking about some surgeon. Dad, Emily, answer your mother immediately. I scrolled through the pages, and it felt like I was falling into someone else's life, as if these messages weren't addressed to me, but to some other Emily, existing somewhere else. I turned on the TV with one flick of the remote, and the light from the screen burned away the darkness. And there was my face, an unfortunate, official photo from last year's symposium. The voiceover spoke in a calm, confident voice. Dr. Emily Chin, Chief of Neurosurgery at Metropolitan Hospital, performed a successful emergency brain surgery on a high-ranking official tonight. Dr. Chin, 31, is recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in cerebrovascular surgery. She graduated with honors from Johns Hopkins Medical School, completed her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, and completed a fellowship in vascular neurosurgery at Stanford. I turned off the sound. I simply watched my frozen image float across the screen. The phone in my hand shook again, this time a call. I raised it to my ear without looking. No knowledge was required. Emily. It was my mother's voice, but not the same, not sharp, not cutting, not sweet with hidden mockery. It was cracked, lost, as if she had been deprived of her familiar script. Emily, on TV, they say you're a surgeon, that you're the chief of staff. Chief of Neurosurgery, I corrected automatically. My lips were dry. Yes. But, you just said hospital. I work at a hospital. You let us think that you're an administrator. Panic crept into her voice. No, my own words came out quiet and cold. You decided for me, and I stopped arguing. But why? Emily, this is insane. If you're so important, why didn't you ever tell me? I slowly sank onto the sofa, staring at the black window mirror, where only a pale shadow with a phone to her ear was reflected. Do you remember 6 years ago? When I came in and told you I'd been approved for the department head position? The silence on the line was thick, heavy. I was 25, I was the youngest in the hospital's history. I'd just published a paper that's still cited to this day. I came to you filled with such pride, such joy. I don't remember that. You said it was just a grandiose title for a simple worker, that David's deal last week was a real achievement, that it was time for me to think about my family and not my career. I heard her sharp, hissing intake of breath. And I stopped trying to explain anything. I continued in an even, monotone voice. Every time I mentioned the operation, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned the research, you said I was obsessed. So finally, I just let go. I let you see the Emily you were comfortable with. It hurt less. Emily, we didn't know. You asked how much a hospital administrator makes. I interrupted, my voice, for the first time, a weary bitterness. I make $470,000 a year, plus grants. I have this apartment. I paid off all my student loans 3 years ago. I have a dream career. I give people back their fathers, their mothers, their minds, and none of this mattered to you at all, because it didn't fit into that small, cozy box you put me in. But we're your family, she whispered, her voice clearly shaking now, close to tears. We love you, we just didn't understand. You didn't want to understand, I corrected, gently but firmly. You needed me to be a failure compared to the perfect David, for contrast, for drama. It's not, it's cruel for you to say that. Perhaps, but it's true, and right now, I'm too exhausted to discuss that truth. I just had 5.5 hours of brain surgery. I'm going to bed. We'll talk some other time. Emily, please wait. I pulled the phone away from my ear. The voice, full of tears and confusion, vanished. The device immediately burst into a new, hysterical trill. I pressed the side button and held it until the screen went black, absorbing the last glimmer of that endless day. I woke to a muffled hum outside. The sun was blaring in my eyes, insistent and unkind. Pulling back the curtain, I saw what I'd feared. The sidewalk opposite was filled with vans with saucers on their roofs and impatient cameramen with shoulder-mounted cameras, so, rescuing a high-ranking official on the eve of a holiday was a surefire way to wake up a media star. I slammed the curtain shut in irritation. Leaving them there in their hungry anticipation, I brewed a strong coffee and began getting ready for my morning rounds. Then the intercom rang. The concierge's voice was nervous, almost apologetic. "Dr. Chen? Guests are waiting for you in the lobby. Tell the press I won't comment at all." "It's not the press, doctor, it's quite a large group, they claim to be related to you." I closed my eyes. "Of course, who else? Let them upstairs." 5 minutes later, my living room, so spacious and silent, turned into a cage. They all squeezed in: Mom, Dad, David with his perpetually smiling wife, Jennifer, Marcus, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert, and about a dozen other cousins, whose faces were only vague memories of childhood. They stood in a tight, awkward crowd in the hallway, their eyes, greedy and confused, darting over the walls, the books, the modern sofa, the original abstract painting over the fireplace that I'd bought with my first big money. They gazed at the shelves groaning with medical tomes and folders of research, at the wall where, in simple frames, hung not paintings but certificates, awards, and commendations, from the College of Surgeons, from Hopkins, from the Massachusetts General. "Emily," Mom began, her voice barely audible. Before anyone says anything, I interrupted, not letting her drag me into a whirlwind of excuses. "I want to be clear, I didn't hide my career, I simply stopped talking about it because every time I did, you made it clear it was empty talk, unworthy of your attention, and so I gave in. You wanted to see a loser, I stopped arguing with your choices." We didn't know how serious it was," Jennifer muttered, her gaze sliding to one of the certificates where my name was embossed in gold letters. "You didn't ask," I snapped coldly. 6 years, not once, not one of you asked, "Emily, what exactly are you doing at the hospital?" You easily accepted the most humiliating explanation and ran with it like a flag. David ran a hand over his face, and for the first time in years, I saw in his eyes not smugness, but embarrassment bordering on shame. I'm sorry, about yesterday, it was rude? Unfair?" "Yes, I finished for him, but it was honest, that's what you all really thought. It was convenient for you to believe that I was the weak link, it made your own accomplishments shine brighter." "We are proud of you, daughter," my father said hoarsely, and these words, which I had been waiting for years, now sounded false and belated. "Really?" I asked, my voice shaking with a surge of bitterness. "Because yesterday, in your living room, in front of 70 people, you weren't proud, you were ashamed, you told everyone I was barely making ends meet, you called my education a waste of money, you let Jennifer say I wasn't smart enough for real medicine." Aunt Sarah looked down, her cheeks flushing deeply. We were wrong, we didn't understand the magnitude." "You didn't want to understand," I repeated, and now it sounded like a death sentence. "That's the whole point." Mom stepped forward, and I saw her fingers clench and unclench the strap of her expensive bag. "You're right, Emily, we have no excuses, we should have listened, we should have been interested, we should have." Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes, always so dry and piercing. "We should have been better." A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the room. They stood, this suddenly diminished, huddled crowd, in the center of the space I had built myself, without their approval, without their faith. "I don't need you to be proud of me now," I said quietly but clearly. "When the truth has come out and become television property, I needed you to respect me when you were sure I was just a girl on the phone, but you couldn't. You only respected the kind of success that could be measured by David's money or social standing." "We can change," Dad said, his voice a shaky, elderly plea, "if you give us one more chance." I glanced at them all, my complicated, wounding, imperfect family. The same faces that had grimaced with condescension yesterday were now distorted with genuine remorse and confusion. They waited, holding their breath. I looked at them for a long time, at their confused, expectant faces, and felt how empty everything inside was, but somewhere deep down, beneath the thickness of fatigue and old pain, something warm and fragile stirred, not forgiveness yet, but possibility, just possibility. "I need to go to the hospital," I said finally, my voice calmer than I expected. "I have someone there." His mind has just been through a storm, and he needs to be kept under close watch. But I'm ready to talk, for real, someday, if we all find the courage to stop pretending." Mom nodded, quickly, frantically wiping her cheeks with her palm. "We want it, we really want it." "And one more thing," I added, already turning the doorknob. The cool metal felt pleasant to the touch. "The next time someone in your circle, your child, your nephew, your friend, tells you what they live and breathe, try to just listen, even if it's not a glittering career in real estate, even if it's just a quiet, honest life. It deserves respect, not pity." They left slowly, one at a time, as if afraid to disturb the fragile truce. David hugged me at the door, not quite a pat on the shoulder, but a real, awkward hug, and whispered, "Sorry." Jennifer, blushing, muttered something about coffee and a real sisterly conversation. Even Aunt Sarah blurted out she'd been wrong, and her correction sounded more comical than sincere, but it was a step. When the door closed behind the last of them, I sank onto the couch. The silence of the apartment they'd just filled now seemed different, not empty, but purified. The weight of the years hadn't lifted from my shoulders, but its oppressive, ugly form had straightened out slightly, becoming something I could live with, something I could work with. The phone on the desk vibrated. I'd turned it on that morning, and now it was cluttered with notifications, but one message loomed over them all. "Dr. Martinez, Chief, the patient has regained consciousness, he's responding to commands, moving all his limbs, his neurological status is intact, you brought him back, from the brink of death." The corners of my lips lifted involuntarily. I replied, feeling a lightness I couldn't explain. "The team did it, everyone, from the orderly to the anesthesiologist, thank you for your work." Then I grabbed my keys, threw on my coat, and left. The hospital was waiting. My patient, whose life had to be monitored with obsessive meticulousness, morning rounds, a department that couldn't stop. Being a chief surgeon isn't a 9-to-5 job, it's a state of being that isn't interrupted by family drama or flashes of fame. But maybe, just maybe, the next family dinner will be different. Maybe someone will ask, "How do you find this tiny vessel?" Or, "What does it feel like when they wake up?" Maybe they'll listen, not out of politeness, but out of genuine interest. Or maybe not. Perhaps old habits are the most tenacious, and that was okay, too, because I didn't go into neurosurgery for their applause. I went there for the dizzying complexity of brain tissue, for the silent dialogue of my hands with living matter, for the unbearable, wonderful responsibility of holding an entire universe of someone else's consciousness in my palms and repairing it. And that was enough, more than enough. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the banquet hall where all the Chin brothers gathered annually. I was invited to speak for the first time, not as an addition to the program, but as the main speaker. My mother, taking the stage, introduced me, "Our daughter, Dr. Emily Chin, Chief of Neurosurgery at Metropolitan Hospital." Her voice rang with pride, real, genuine, and it brought a lump to my throat. I spoke about fragile neural networks, about what life looks like under a microscope, about the silent war for every brain cell, about victories that smell like antiseptic, and defeats that leave a bitter taste in my mouth in the morning. I spoke of long nights poring over books and even longer nights at the operating table. And for the first time in my life, my family listened, without whispering, without checking their watches. They looked at me, and they heard. As I stepped off the stage, my younger cousin, Lisa, ran up to me. She was 8, and her eyes shone like 2 black constellations. "Aunt Emily," she whispered, grabbing my hand, can I do that too? Be a brain surgeon?" I crouched down in front of her to be on her level. "You know what? Anyone can do it if they want it with all their heart, and if you ever achieve it. Don't let anyone, not even your closest ones, tell you your dream is too big, okay?" She nodded so earnestly that her 2 dark braids flew up into the air. "I won't let you, I promise." I raised my head and met my mother's gaze from across the room. She was leaning against the doorframe, looking at us, and smiling, not that brilliant, honed, scalpel-like smile, but a soft, warm one, with crinkles at the corners of her eyes. There was sadness in it, yes, but also hope. Everything was still far from perfect. Years of unspoken things lay between us, and the wounds healed slowly, leaving scars. But it was a beginning, that first, tentative step, and sometimes, it really is enough to just start.